When I left the hospital with my daughter in my arms, it was raining heavily. The raindrops were as big as beans and stung my face. The little one in my arms shrank his neck and clutched my collar tightly, asking in a baby voice, "Mommy, is Daddy really leaving us?" I choked up and almost couldn't hold back my tears. A 3-year-old child already understood. I took a deep breath and forced a smile. "Baby, be good. Daddy is just too busy." No sooner had I finished speaking than a black Maybach slammed on the brakes in front of me, splashing water that soaked my pant legs. The door opened, and a pair of shiny leather shoes stepped into the puddle. I looked up and met a pair of eyes that were as dark as night. It was Miles. It had been 5 years since we last saw each other, and he was even more fierce than before. He was dressed in a well-tailored suit, his eyebrows and eyes sharp as knives. Just standing there, he made it hard to breathe. "When?" He stared at the child in my arms, his voice cold as ice. "You'd better explain yourself." I instinctively hugged my daughter and took a step back. In the rain, his gaze cut through me like a knife, and I could even hear my heart beating wildly. "What do you mean, explain?" I heard myself say. "Mr. Miles, we haven't been together for a long time." He sneered and reached out to grab the child. I panicked and shielded my daughter fiercely. "What are you doing?" "What am I doing?" He grabbed my wrist with such force that my bones ached. "When, you stole my child for 5 years. Now you ask me what I'm doing?" My daughter was scared to tears. She hugged my neck and cried, "Mom, I'm scared." I struggled desperately, rain and tears blurring my vision. "Miles, let go. She's not your child." "No?" He suddenly let go of me, pulled a crumpled paternity test out of his pocket, and slammed it into my face. "Then tell me, what is this?" The paper was wet from the rain, but the words were still clear and sharp. "Confirmed biological relationship." My head buzzed and I felt cold all over. How could he know? I had been hiding for 5 years and even used a fake name for my prenatal checkups. "When?" He grabbed my arm tightly, his voice low and hushed, like the calm before a storm. "Do you really think you can keep this from me forever?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. The rain grew heavier, and his eyes became increasingly terrifying. Just as I thought he was about to lose his mind, he suddenly let go of my arm, took a step back, and tugged at his tie. "Get in the car," he said, opening the back door with a tone that brooked no argument. "Let's talk." I stood still. He narrowed his eyes. "Don't make me say it again." I knew this was a sign that he was about to lose his temper. 5 years ago, it was this look that scared me so much that I fled Jiangqing in the middle of the night. But now, I was holding my daughter in my arms. I gritted my teeth, bent down, and crawled into the car. As the door closed, he leaned in close, his warm breath tickling my ear. "When, you're not getting away this time." The car's heater was on full blast, but I was still shivering uncontrollably. My daughter was lying in my arms, her small hands tightly clutching my collar, her big eyes shyly peeking at Miles. Miles sat across from us, his long fingers tapping his knees, his gaze fixed on me. "What's your name?" he suddenly asked, his voice low. I instinctively hugged my daughter tighter. "Pola. Pola." He repeated softly, his eyes softening slightly as he reached out to touch her head. Pola immediately shrank into my arms, dodging his hand. Miles' hand froze in midair, his eyes darkening. I quickly explained, "She's shy." "Shy?" He laughed coldly. "I'm her father, she's afraid of me?" I bit my lip and didn't say anything. The atmosphere in the car was so oppressive it was suffocating. After a while, Miles suddenly said to the driver, "Go to JCY." I looked up sharply and said, "No. That was our former home. After the divorce, I never went back there again." Miles glanced at me and said in a tone that brooked no argument, "It's not up to you." The car sped along, and the rain outside grew heavier, reminding me of the night I left Jiangqing. Pola was asleep in my arms, her little face still streaked with tears. I gently patted her back, but my heart was beating wildly. JCY hadn't changed a bit. Even the green plants at the door were the ones I had planted myself back then. Miles got out of the car with Pola, who was fast asleep in his arms, and I hurried after them. "Let me hold her." He sidestepped me and walked straight into the house. "Don't wake her up." I had no choice but to follow him step by step. The moment the living room light came on, I felt as if I had returned to 5 years ago. My favorite oranges are on the coffee table, the small blanket I bought is thrown on the sofa, and even my slippers are still the pink pair. It's as if I never left. Miles gently placed Pola on the bed in the master bedroom, covered her with a blanket, and moved with such caution that it didn't seem like him. He closed the door, turned to look at me, and his eyes instantly turned cold. "Now, it's time to settle the score." I took a step back, my back hitting the wall. "Miles, we've been divorced for a long time." "Divorced?" He grabbed my wrist and pulled me toward him. "When, you ran away with my child, and now you're telling me you want a divorce?" His breath was hot and dangerous on my face. I turned away. "It was you who didn't want this child." "When did I ever say that?" He suddenly raised his voice, then lowered it sharply. "I've been looking for you for 5 years." I was stunned. Back then, it was his secretary who told me that Mr. Miles said this child couldn't stay. Could it be? "Who do you think forced you to have an abortion?" He let go of me and sneered, "Tara?" I looked up sharply. "How do you know?" "Because she's in prison right now," Miles said slowly, "forgery of medical orders and fraud. That's enough to keep her locked up for 10 years. My legs went weak, and I almost fell to my knees. "So, for the past 5 years, I've been hiding away all alone?" Miles reached out to support me, his voice suddenly softening. "Win, let's go home." The sound of him calling me Win instantly brought tears to my eyes. For the first time in 5 years, I cried in front of him. I cried so hard I couldn't breathe, and my tears soaked a large patch on the front of Miles' shirt. He stood stiffly, not moving, for a long time, then awkwardly patted me on the back. "Don't cry." His tone was still cold, but the force of his hand was unbelievably light. I looked up and caught his slightly reddened eyes. This discovery stunned me. Miles could cry? The Miles who was decisive in business and never bothered to explain himself was now crying because of me? "What are you looking at?" He turned his face away, his voice hoarse. "Go wash your face, you're ugly." It was his usual sharp tongue, but for some reason, I suddenly felt like laughing. When I came out of the bathroom, I found Miles standing motionless at the door of the children's room, staring intently at the sleeping Pola. The warm yellow light cast on his profile softened his sharp features. "She looks like me," he said suddenly. I walked over and looked at Pola's chubby little face. "Yeah, especially when she's angry." Miles turned to look at me. "Does she get angry often?" "Only when I don't buy her ice cream." I couldn't help but laugh. "Just like you, she gives you the cold shoulder when she doesn't get what she wants." Miles hummed softly and reached out to gently touch Pola's cheek. Pola wrinkled her nose in her sleep and rolled over. Miles immediately withdrew his hand, nervous like a child who had done something wrong. This scene inexplicably made my nose sting. If there hadn't been a misunderstanding back then, would he have been learning to be a father so carefully by now? "She." Miles hesitated. "Did she ask about me?" I bit my lip. "She did." "What did you say?" "I told her that Dad is working abroad and is very busy." Miles was silent for a long time, then suddenly said, "Tomorrow I'll take her to the amusement park." I was startled. "No way." "Why not?" He frowned. "I'm her dad." "But she doesn't even know you. If you suddenly take her out to play, she'll be scared." Miles's face darkened. "Then what do you suggest? Keep pretending I don't exist?" We glared at each other, neither willing to back down. Finally, Pola's mumbling broke the deadlock. "Dad." She muttered indistinctly, her small hands grasping at the air. Miles froze. I looked at his ears, which turned red in an instant, and suddenly felt soft-hearted. "How about, tomorrow you come with us to play in the neighborhood for a while?" Once she gets used to you, we can go to the amusement park. Miles stared at Pola for a long time before finally uttering a muffled aha. I slept in the guest room that night, tossing and turning, unable to sleep. I got up in the middle of the night to drink some water and found Miles sitting motionless by Pola's bed, staring at her. Moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting a long shadow on him. I stood at the doorway and suddenly realized, these past 5 years, I wasn't the only one suffering. Early the next morning, I was awakened by Pola's screams. "Mom! Mom!" I rushed out without even putting on my slippers and saw Pola sitting in her high chair with a plate of burnt fried eggs in front of her, while Miles stood next to her wearing an apron, his face even blacker than the eggs. "Dad made it," Pola pointed to the plate, her little face wrinkled up. "I can't eat it." Miles cleared his throat awkwardly. It was my first time, I didn't get the heat right. I stifled a laugh and walked over, only to find that the trash can was already filled with 5 or 6 failed fried eggs. This man, who never budged an inch at the negotiating table, was completely flustered by a 3-year-old child. "Let me do it," I took the spatula. "Pola likes soft-boiled eggs." Miles stood next to me, hesitating to speak. The kitchen was narrow, and his body heat came through his thin shirt, reminding me of how we used to be, one cooking and the other messing around. "You've lost weight," he said suddenly. My hand shook, and I almost burned the egg. The oil sizzled in the pan, and I stared at the dancing oil droplets. "I've been fine." "You're lying." He reached out to turn down the heat. "I checked your bank statements. During the hardest times, you worked 3 jobs in one day." I turned around abruptly. "You investigated me? What else could I do?" His eyes darkened. "Let you continue to hide me and my daughter?" Pola suddenly jumped off the chair and hugged my legs. "Mommy isn't angry." I took a deep breath, squatted down, and kissed her forehead. "Mommy isn't angry." Miles also squatted down and tentatively touched Pola's head. "Daddy isn't angry either." Pola tilted her head and looked at him, then suddenly reached out and poked his face. "Daddy is mean." Miles froze. I quickly explained, "She means you look mean." Before I could finish, Miles suddenly made a funny face. This man, who was usually so stingy with his smiles, was actually making funny faces. Pola giggled and reached out to poke him again. Miles took the opportunity to pick her up, his movements as stiff as if he were holding something fragile. "Go get changed, Dad will take you downstairs to play." Pola didn't resist, but obediently hugged his neck. Standing in the kitchen, I watched the awkward interaction between father and daughter, and my eyes suddenly felt a little warm. It turned out that blood ties were so magical that even after 3 years of absence, they could establish a connection in an instant. After breakfast, the 3 of us went downstairs together. Miles held Pola in one arm and instinctively reached out to take my hand, but withdrew it halfway. This cautious gesture stabbed me in the heart. We used to be so close, but now we even hesitate to hold hands. In the playground of the residential area, Pola sat on the swing and Miles pushed her gently from behind. "Higher!" Pola shouted excitedly. Miles was so nervous that his hands were shaking. "It's too high and dangerous." "Higher!" Seeing Miles looking helpless, I couldn't help but walk over and say, "Let me push." "No, I can learn," he said stubbornly, standing still. The sunlight filtered through the leaves and fell on us in dappled patches, and Pola's laughter rang out like wind chimes. At that moment, I felt as if we were just an ordinary family of 3. Until, "Mr. Miles?" A sharp female voice came from behind me. "It really is you." I turned around and saw a stylish young woman walking quickly toward us, affectionately linking her arm through Miles's. What a coincidence. I just happened to be here looking at houses. Miles frowned and pulled his arm away. "Is there something you need?" The woman finally noticed me, her gaze shifting between Pola and me, her smile becoming strained. "Who is this?" Pola suddenly jumped off the swing and rushed to my side. "Mom." The woman's expression changed instantly. Miles said coldly, my wife and daughter. I looked at him in shock. Wife? We've been divorced for 5 years. The woman smiled awkwardly and hurriedly took her leave. After they had gone, I finally spoke up, Miles, we've already. Let's remarry, he suddenly interrupted me. Today. I thought I had heard him wrong. What did you say? Miles bent down and picked up Pola, his tone as calm as if he were discussing the weather. I said, let's remarry today. Pola wrapped her arms around his neck and asked in a babyish voice, what is remarriage? It means that mommy and daddy will always be together. He rubbed his nose against his daughter's, but his eyes were fixed on me. Is that okay? Pola immediately cheered, yes. I want mommy and daddy to sleep together. My face flushed red, Miles. Don't say that in front of the kids. I'm not saying anything wrong. He held Pola with one hand and suddenly grabbed my wrist with the other. Win, I've regretted it every day for the past 5 years. The sunlight was too bright, and I couldn't see his expression clearly. I could only feel the heat from his palm, which was frighteningly hot. This is too sudden. I instinctively took a step back. We need time. Time? He sneered. 5 years isn't enough? Pola sensed that something was wrong and suddenly burst into tears. Daddy, Mommy, don't fight. Miles immediately panicked and clumsily patted her on the back. We won't fight, Daddy was wrong. This man who was once a powerful figure in the business world was now completely defeated by his daughter's tears. I sighed and reached out to take Pola in my arms. Don't cry, sweetheart. Let's go get some ice cream, okay? Pola nodded hesitantly, still holding onto Miles' sleeve. Daddy, come too. 20 minutes later, the 3 of us were sitting in an ice cream shop, Pola still with tears on her face, but happily munching on her ice cream cone. Miles stared at her for a long time, then suddenly said, the way she eats ice cream is just like you. Huh? She always licks around the edge first, then eats it from top to bottom. He mimicked her, just like a little hamster. I was stunned. He remembered such a small habit. You. I hesitated. Did you really look for me these past 5 years? Miles' eyes turned cold instantly. Do you think I'm lying to you? He pulled up a map from his phone gallery, covered in red dots. These are all the places you've lived. Every time I found a lead, you moved again. I stared at the dots, my throat tightening. It wasn't my imagination after all. Those familiar-looking figures, those wrong phone calls, he was looking for me. The closest I came was in Hangzhou. He stared at me. When I got to the hospital, the nurse said you had just given birth and been transferred to another hospital. The spoon in my hand clattered onto the table. On the day Pola was born, I did indeed have to transfer hospitals due to an emergency. So now, Miles pulled out a tissue and slowly wiped the ice cream off Pola's face. How much longer do you want me to wait? His tone was calm, but his hand holding the tissue was trembling slightly. Pola suddenly raised the ice cream cone to his mouth. Dad, eat. Miles paused for a moment, then lowered his head and took a bite, leaving a smear of cream on his lips. Pola giggled and reached out to wipe it off. Daddy's so clumsy. Watching this scene, my heart felt like it was soaking in warm water, both sour and soft. At least, I heard myself say, at least go on a few dates first? Miles' eyes lit up. Tomorrow? I have an interview tomorrow. The day after tomorrow? Pola's parenting class. When? He interrupted me, gritting his teeth. Are you messing with me? Pola suddenly jumped off the chair, grabbing me with one hand and Miles with the other. Let's go now. Where are we going? We asked in unison. To get married. Pola said confidently, then we'll buy a big cake. Miles laughed and picked up his daughter. Whatever you say. He looked at me with an incredibly tender expression. What does Mom say? The sunlight streamed through the glass window and warmed us. I looked down at Pola's expectant eyes and finally nodded gently. At the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau, I tugged at Miles' sleeve and refused to go in. Are you crazy? I whispered, we didn't even bring our household registration book. Miles held Pola in one arm and pulled 2 red books out of his suit pocket with the other. I brought them. I stared at him in surprise. When did you? My assistant delivered it this morning. He said it casually, as if he were commenting on the weather. I've been keeping your book. Pola wriggled in his arms. Let's go, let's go. I stood still. Miles, this is too hasty. Rash? He sneered. We got married 5 years ago, and we hadn't even known each other for 3 months. Now our child is 3 years old, and you're telling me it was rash? I was speechless. Pola suddenly pouted and started to cry. Mom lied. Miles immediately seized the opportunity. Look, our daughter can't wait. And so, half-heartedly, I was dragged into the Civil Affairs Bureau by my father and daughter. When it was time to take the photo, the photographer smiled and said, let's include the baby too. It's rare to see such a cute family portrait. Pola sat between us, smiling so broadly that her eyes curved into crescents. Miles reluctantly joined in with a slight upturn of his lips, while my expression as stiff as if I'd been kidnapped. Smile, ladies, the photographer teased. You're married to such a handsome husband, and you're not happy? Miles suddenly leaned close to my ear, his warm breath brushing against my earlobe. If you don't smile, I'll kiss you in front of everyone. I was so startled that I forced a smile. As the flash went off, Miles's hand quietly wrapped around my waist. When they got their marriage certificate, Pola insisted on holding it herself, but she tripped and fell as soon as they stepped outside, and the certificate fell into a puddle. Miles quickly picked it up, but it was already half wet. I'm so sorry, Pola said tearfully. Miles crouched down and wiped the dust off her knees with his sleeve. It's okay, Dad can get you 10 more. Looking at him being so gentle, I suddenly remembered 5 years ago when we first got married. He was just like this, picking up my bag that had fallen on the ground and saying, if it's broken, we'll just buy a new one. Some people never change. On the way home, Pola fell asleep on Miles' shoulder. She seems really attached to you, I whispered. Miles adjusted his posture to make his daughter more comfortable. It's in the blood, he said. After a moment of silence, he suddenly asked, what do you want to eat tonight? Huh? To celebrate our remarriage. He paused. I made a reservation at a restaurant. I couldn't help but laugh and cry. Are you so sure I'll agree? I'm not sure. He looked at me with a deep gaze. So I've also prepared Plan B, Plan C, and Plan D. What's Plan D? Just tie you up and take you there. He said casually. Fortunately, we didn't have to use it. I was so angry that I kicked him, but he dodged me nimbly. Pola muttered something in her sleep, startling us both into stillness. The setting sun cast long shadows of the 3 of us, overlapping and indistinguishable from one another. At that moment, I suddenly realized that the most beautiful love is not the infatuation of first love, but the feeling of wanting to spend the rest of your life with someone after being apart for a long time. Miles booked a restaurant in the highest revolving restaurant in Jiangqing. Standing in the elevator, I looked at the reflection of a family of 3 in the mirror and felt a momentary sense of unreality. Pola was awake and playing with Miles's tie, and he was indulging his daughter as she tied his Armani tie into a tight knot. The elevator doors opened with a ding. The entire restaurant was empty. Did you book the place? I asked in shock. Miles placed Pola in a specially prepared high chair. Yeah, we didn't want to be disturbed. Outside the floor-to-ceiling window, the entire night view of Jiangqing was visible. Pola excitedly tapped on the glass. Mom. The stars have fallen to the ground. I followed the direction of her finger and saw that it was actually the lights of the city. The waiter began serving the dishes, each one of which was my favorite. Do you remember? I was a little surprised. Miles was helping Pola cut her steak and said without looking up, the mango sticky rice you cried for in the middle of the night when you were pregnant. I searched half of Jiangqing for it. My nose stung. The memory was so vivid. When my morning sickness was at its worst, I suddenly craved Thai food in the middle of the night, and Miles didn't say a word, just got in the car and drove out. When he came back, I threw up so badly I couldn't see straight. Dad, Pola suddenly raised her juice cup, cheers. Miles raised his wine glass in response, and I quickly raised mine too. The 3 glasses clinked lightly in the air. What are we celebrating? I asked Pola with a smile. Celebrate. She tilted her head and thought for a moment. Celebrate that Dad found us. Miles's hand visibly trembled, and the red wine rippled slightly against the glass. Halfway through dinner, Pola started rubbing her eyes. Miles signaled to the waiter to bring a small blanket and skillfully wrapped her up like a silkworm. You're quite good at taking care of children, I teased softly. He gently patted his daughter's back. Time for a refresher lesson. Over the past 5 years, his voice has been very soft. I've read a lot of parenting books. My heart felt like it had been torn apart. Just then, the lights in the restaurant suddenly dimmed. A spotlight shone on our table, and a waiter slowly pushed a 3-tiered cake toward us. On top of the cake stood 2 little figurines, me in a wedding dress and Miles holding a baby. This is... Miles suddenly stood up and pulled a small velvet box out of his pocket. It wasn't a ring. He opened the box, and inside was a key. The house keys. His voice was a bit hoarse. The day you left, I didn't change the locks. I finally couldn't hold back my tears. Pola was awakened by my sobs and reached out to wipe my tears, still half asleep. Mommy, don't cry. Miles knelt down on one knee and placed the keys in the palm of my hand. Win, this time, I'll chase you. There's no need to chase me. I choked out, I can't run anymore. The starlight outside the window intertwined with the city lights, illuminating the faces of the 3 of us. Pola suddenly climbed onto the table, scooped a large chunk of cream off the cake, and smeared it on Miles' face. Dad, eat. Miles was caught off guard by the surprise attack, froze for a second, then suddenly scooped a dollop of cream and smeared it on my nose. Pola laughed so hard she was bent over double. As I looked at the father and daughter covered in cream, I suddenly realized that perhaps happiness never needs a grand entrance. It just quietly melts into the creamy aroma of everyday life. On the way home, Pola was already fast asleep in her car seat in the back, still clutching the pink balloon from the restaurant. Miles held the steering wheel with one hand and gently placed his other hand on top of mine. We're moving tomorrow. He said it as if it were obvious. I turned to him. What? Your things and your daughter's things, he said, looking straight ahead. I've asked my assistant to pack them tomorrow. The light from the street lamp danced across his sharply defined profile, and I noticed the fine lines at the corners of his eyes. It wasn't just me who had grown older in the past 5 years. Too fast. I protested softly. He raised his eyebrows. Fast? You made me wait 5 years, Win. The car stopped at a red light, and he suddenly leaned over, his nose almost touching mine. Or maybe you want to try marriage first? His warm breath brushed against my lips, and I hurriedly leaned back. Drive carefully. He chuckled softly and gripped the steering wheel again. Back home, Miles tiptoed into the nursery and picked up Pola. I stood in the doorway watching him awkwardly change his daughter's nightgown, moving as carefully as if he were defusing a bomb. Let me do it, I said, walking over to help. He shook his head. I have to learn. After Pola fell asleep, we quietly left the room. In the hallway, Miles suddenly pushed me against the wall. Now, he said hoarsely, it's time to talk about us. I was so nervous my palms were sweating. Pola will wake up. The soundproofing is good. He leaned down to kiss me, but stopped just a centimeter away. Answer me one question first. What? In the past 5 years, his eyelashes brushed against my cheek. Have you ever thought about coming back? I looked into his deep, unfathomable eyes and finally told him the truth. Every time I pass by a baby store and see fathers holding their children, I can't help but think. His Adam's apple bobbed once, and suddenly he picked me up horizontally. Miles! I exclaimed. Make up for the past 5 years. He strode toward the master bedroom. Don't even think about sleeping tonight. Early in the morning, I was awakened by Pola knocking on the door. Mom. Dad. The sun is shining on my butt. I sat up abruptly, my whole body aching as if I had been run over by a truck. Miles was already dressed and tying his tie. Get some more sleep, he said, leaning down to kiss my forehead. I'll deal with the little brat. I listened to him coaxing our daughter outside the door and felt a sense of eerie familiarity. 5 years ago, it was the same. He would get up early for a meeting, I would linger in bed, and in the end, he would always be defeated by our daughter's cries. But at that time, Pola was still in my belly. I put on my robe and walked out to see Miles frantically braiding Pola's hair, his hands covered in rubber bands. Let me do it, I said, taking the comb from him. Pola looked up at me and asked, Mom, are we going to the amusement park today? I looked at Miles, who shrugged his shoulders and said, Promise the kids. So 2 hours later, we were standing at the entrance to Disneyland. Pola was wearing a snow-white dress, holding one of us by the hand, and skipping and jumping her way inside. Miles was wearing a casual shirt and looked much younger than usual. Some young girls were secretly looking at him, but he scared them away with a glance. Jealous? I asked deliberately. He pinched the back of my neck. You know who's the only one in my eyes. All day long, Pola spun around like a little top, darting between projects. Miles held her the entire time, his arm strength astonishing. Before the evening fireworks display began, Pola finally fell asleep from exhaustion. Miles let her rest her head on his chest and gently patted her back. The dazzling fireworks lit up the night sky, illuminating the similar profiles of father and daughter. Miles. I called him softly. Thank you for finding us. He turned his head, fireworks flickering in his eyes. Even if you hide on the moon, I'll build a spaceship and chase after you. I smiled and leaned against his shoulder. Pola smacked her lips in her sleep, her small hand unconsciously grabbing the hem of my shirt. The night breeze ruffled the hair of the three of us, and in the distance, the spires of the castle sparkled in the fireworks. After all this time, it turns out that the most beautiful scenery isn't far away, it's on the way home.